Hello everybody, it's Kate the West Coast Paper Crafter, and you are joining me for the third project in my Cake Celebrations card class at home. This card is what I would consider an Avid card. It's got lots of different elements and I've incorporated a few different supplies than just the Cake Celebration stamp and dies. So for this project, I am using the Cake Celebration stamps, and I am using two different sets of dies, the Country Flower dies and the Cake Celebration dies. And I'm also using two different embossing folders. I've got the Starstruck embossing folder and the Exposed Brick 3D embossing folder. So if you are crafting along, use whatever you have in your stash if you don't have exactly what I have. So let's go through all the pieces. I've already gone ahead and got everything cut out and ready to go. So I have got in Very Vanilla. This is a 4 1/4 by 11-inch piece of cardstock that is scored at 5 1/2 on the 11-inch side. I'm just going to fold that in half, and that is our card base. I've got a piece of Highland Heather. This is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. And then I've got another piece of Very Vanilla that is 4 by 5 1/4. Now I've cut out a die cut. I actually used 3 different die sets for this project, my mistake. I also used the Nested Essential dies, and I've cut out this rectangle. And this is, I'm just going to measure it. It's 2 1/4 by 3. If you don't have this die, you can just cut something to that size, 2 1/4 by 3. And then I've cut out some pieces for the cake, including the frosting and the cake plate, and I've cut that out in gold foil. And then from the Country Flowers dies, I've cut out some leaves in Very Vanilla and some flowers in Fresh Freesia and Highland Heather. So I'm also going to be using some Fresh Freesia seam binding ribbon, and I've got some antique pearls for this project. All right, let's get started. I'm just going to move some of these little pieces out of the way for now, and we're just going to build our card front. All right, I'm going to put these over here so I don't lose them. And I'm just going to grab that Very Vanilla, that's 4 inches by 5 1/4. And I'm going to do a little bit of stamping in gorgeous. That Very Vanilla, that's 4 inches by 5. I had to turn the volume down on my computer, my apologies. So I'm using some gorgeous grape ink, and I'm just going to stamp Happy Anniversary on this cardstock, and I'm going to stamp it up at the top. And then what I'm going to do with this layer is I'm going to run it through the embossing machine, and I'm going to use the Embossed Brick 3D embossing folder. So I'm just going to pop this in to my folder, like so. I'm just going to give that a quick run through my embossing machine, which is just off to the side so it doesn't shake the table. All right, so now this layer is embossed, but you still see the sentiment quite easily. It's a nice dark color, so it pops right out. All right, so the Very Vanilla, I'm going to mat it onto my Highland Heather, and then I'm just going to glue that down to the front of my card base. going to raise the camera up just to make sure that I stay in camera view. All right, I'm just going to add this to the front of the card base, and then I'm going to put this card aside and we will build our cake and focal point for the front of the card. Okay, so I'm going to start by just putting together my plate. So I'm going to just add just a little bit of glue to the back of this smaller piece that's going to go onto the cake stand. And it doesn't need a lot of glue, just a little bit. I'm just going to grab my silicone mat. That's very handy when you're gluing things to have a silicone mat. It just helps keep everything a little less messy. And if you get some glue on the silicone mat, it just rubs right off. All right, I'm just going to let that dry. And then for the cake, before I glue the frosting on, I just want to add a little bit of texture to the cake to make it look like there's some fancy frosting. So I've got the Starstruck embossing folder, and I just need to change the plates in my cut and emboss because this is not a 3D folder, so the plate recipe is a little bit different. So what I'm going to do is just partially emboss the cake pieces at an angle. So I'm just going to pop them into the embossing folder just partially. And then I'm going to run them through, just run them through the machine, and I'll show you what it looks like as soon as I get them run through. But it just adds a little bit more to your pieces and gives it a really nice look. All right, so I've partially embossed the cake pieces. I'll give you a close-up so they look like that. And if you can emboss the entire piece of cake, it's totally up to you, but I just wanted to go for myself just partial. And I'm going to flip this one piece over so this embossed side for the small piece is on the opposite side of the bigger piece. Now that I've got them embossed, I can go ahead and glue down the frosting. So same thing like with the cake stand, just a little bit of glue, that's all you need. If you have a fine tip glue bottle, even better. I do have one. I've just, it's just somewhere in my craft mess, which is half my problem when it comes to crafting, is losing my craft tools that are usually right in front of me. All right, so I'm just going to pop the frosting on the big cake, and then I'll do the same for the little cake, and then I'm going to glue them all together. All right, so now these pieces, they're all going to get glued onto my rectangle die cut. So I'm going to glue on the going to glue down the cake platter almost right at the bottom of this rectangle. I'm just going to add it so the base of the cake platter is just above the little perforated lines at the bottom of my rectangle die. And I'm going to just try to get that right in the middle. There. So you can see I put that cake just above those little dotted lines. Oops. I find the gold foil needs a little extra time to glue down to properly stick to the cardstock. Okay. Then I'm just going to figure out where my cakes are going to go. And before I commit them down, I'm just going to add some of these leaves behind each piece of cake. So this piece, I'm going to cut it in half. And use both pieces on both sides of the cake. So this one, the smaller set of leaves, I'm just going to glue right behind that little piece of cake, and then I'll do the same thing with the bigger one. Just going to let that dry. I'm going to add some of the leaves to this cake. All right, now I'm ready to glue these down. So I'm going to start with the bigger piece of cake, and I'm going to glue this right above my cake plate. I'm just going to add just a little bit of glue to these white flowers to keep them down, but not the very edge of the flowers because they're going to pop over this cardstock just a little bit. So if you like it like that, you can leave just one layer of cake. I am going to add the second tier and do the same thing, just adding a bit of glue to the back. And then what I'm going to do is add in some of the flowers. So I've got 5, and I'm going to put some in the bottom corner, and I'll alternate the colors between the fresh Freesia and the Highland Heather. And then I'll add some other flowers on the opposite corner. That didn't quite stick where I wanted it to. All right, I'm going to do 2 more in the opposite corner, and then I'll decide where that third flower is going to go. I think I'm going to put it right down in the corner. All right, so this is optional, but I'm going to take some of these smaller antique pearls, and I'm going to add some right onto the frosting of the cake. Now, you may not like the look of the antique pearls on your cake, so you do you. I'm just going to make this cake extra fancy. All right, now I'm going to pop up this layer onto my card front, just underneath the sentiment Happy Anniversary. I'm just going to use dimensionals for that. All right, and then the last thing I want to do for this card is just add a little bow right on the cake stand. So I'm just going to take some of this fresh Freesia seam binding ribbon and attempt to tie a tiny little bow that's going to fit well on this cake stand. My fingers are slightly sticky, which is making this a little bit more challenging than it needs to be. You can see that this seam binding ribbon does tie a cute little bow. It's fairly easy to tie once you get past your sticky fingers if you're like me. And this seam binding ribbon right now is in the celebration brochure for Stampin' Up. And it is available free with a $75 purchase if you're in Canada until the end of February, unless they run out, which I guess could happen. All right, so now I'm just going to shorten that ribbon a little bit, and then I'm going to glue that down just at the midway up that cake stand. I don't want to cover up the flowers, so I'm going to glue it a little bit lower. So I'm just going to add one little drop of glue. I'm going to put this ribbon down, and then I am going to take my block and I'm going to weight it down and let that sit for a couple minutes for that glue to dry. So there you have it. There is our third project, my Take on an Avid card. I really hope you enjoyed this design, and I would love to see what you create. So if you're crafting along, then feel free to share your pictures with me. I do love to see what you come up with. Thanks for tuning in.